What's up everyone, it's Anna, also known as That Star Wars Girl, and happy November! I decided to start off the month of November, I would be doing a, fun Q&A. Now for those of you that don't know, I do have an Instagram for, my Star Wars girl account, and so on my Instagram I'll do fun things in the stories like ask questions, and so what I did for this video is I put, ask me questions for my Q&A video, and I picked either the most reoccurring questions or the one that I was intrigued by, that I found interesting. So when I do stuff like that, it's one of those fun things that's on my Instagram. So if you have an Instagram and you want to follow me so that way you can participate in stuff like that, that's where to do it. But let's get started with these questions. There was a lot of really good questions, and there was some that I was kind of blown away by, just thinking about it, and I was like, wow, that's a pretty in-depth question. So let's get started. Question number 1. What is your favorite movie outside of Star Wars? That's a really easy one for me, and I usually try to explain to people, outside of fandom movies, like outside of Star Wars and Star Trek and, sci-fi, I kind of group them all together as, far as like themed movies like Lord of the Rings, I would put all of that in, Batman movies, superhero movies. Like if you talk about just movies that are just real life, kind of like normie movies, it's very easy. My favorite movie that I can watch over and over again, which some people might think I'm weird for, but it is Silence of the Lambs. I love the book Silence of the Lambs, and I love the movie. That's one of the few movies that I would consider a perfect movie, and yeah, people are usually surprised when I tell them, but I love Silence of the Lambs. I love the dynamic of Clarice and how she's on the hero's journey, and she's trying to become an FBI agent, and it's kind of that how she has to be able to achieve her goal, to be able to save Catherine from the villain Buffalo Bill, the evil serial killer. She has to go into the lion's pit and deal with Hannibal Lecter, and that weird type of dynamic mentorship, and the way that she gets the respect of a psychopath, and the way that she's able to achieve her goals. I love it. I find it fascinating, and it blows my mind that in today's day and age, with all the SJWs wanting to scream about female empowerment, if you want to see female empowerment, watch that movie. You get to see the way Clarice Starling deals with all this stuff, and deals with sexism in the workplace, and then also you get to see what Catherine goes through, being the victim, being in the bottom of a well, with the serial killer, the embodiment of evil. This guy's gonna murder her, and her struggle to survive, and her that instinct inside of you to survive, to use anything that you can. She even resorts to trying to get his dog because she knows that's the only thing he cares about. And it's just a fascinating movie. I could go on forever about it, but that's my favorite movie. I love it so much, and I'd highly recommend it to anyone if you have not seen it. I kind of spoiled it for you, but it's a great movie. Go watch it. Question number 2. Were you nervous when you did your first YouTube talk, or have you always been so confident? I was a little confused by the phrasing of this. I don't know if there's a language barrier from the person that asked this, but I thought the question was intriguing. So I'm not sure if this means first YouTube video or when I did a first live stream, so I'll kind of explain both. When I did my first video, the reason why I did it was because I was so angry because of The Last Jedi, and it just wasn't Star Wars, and everyone that I talked to that was wondering why, me, the one that's obsessed with Star Wars, the one that everyone knows my entire life as that weird Star Wars girl, how could I not like a Star Wars movie? And I was trying to explain to everyone, through messages and copying, pasting, tweaking things based on what people were asking me, and it was hundreds of messages because everyone I've ever known wanted to know why I didn't like this movie. And so I was fed up, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to film a video. And so I turned on my phone, I just kind of set it up on a box, and I just was like, okay, this is, these are the top questions that I'm gonna ask, plus let me just go into the emotional depth and explaining everything. And so it was something that was inside that I just had to release. I had to let it out, and so that's how it came out. And it doesn't make me nervous to turn on my phone and, talk to it. It's kind of like when you're, kind of going over, maybe if you have to give a presentation at work, or you're getting ready for a job interview, and you're talking to yourself in the mirror to try to, like, work it out to make sure that, it sounds okay. That's kind of what it's like. And in a way, it's kind of therapeutic for me to do this, because it's not like I'm standing in front of a person, like a real human being, and talking. Then I get really nervous because I kind of have social anxiety, and I've always felt more comfortable talking to, large groups of people as compared to talking to individuals. I know it's one of my quirks, but that's just how I've always been. But it's not so much that I wouldn't really consider it confidence. I can be confident. I know I learned, what's one of the things that I, learned throughout my life, especially from watching my parents. Both are two people that ran, successful businesses. My mom sold her business when, she decided to raise her 3 children. But, my father's a very, closed off person. He usually keeps to himself. But when I watched him in the workplace, he's very assertive. And it's like, you watching, two people, and my mom is a very type A personality. My father is, kind of, I wouldn't say he's type B. I would say, he knows when he needs to assert himself and when he doesn't. And so watching my father, that really taught me a lot about, being assertive when you need to be, especially when you need to get a point across. And that's one of the things that when you're making videos on YouTube, every single video, at least that I try to make, I'm trying to get a point across. I'm trying to explain something. I'm trying to break something down. I'm trying to make people understand the way that I see it. Or, when I'm reading articles and stuff, I'm trying to, educate, with the knowledge that I have, and, making the best, analysis that I possibly can. So it's very different doing this, by myself in a room as compared to, going out around people. That's when I get kind of because people are really judgmental, and you get that instant feedback, and it's like, I've been judged enough in my life for the things that I love and the things I care about, so it makes me very closed off when I'm around other humans. But I hope that answered the question. Question number 3. What was the most difficult part of growing up as a Star Wars fan? I would have to say trying to find somebody to share my love for Star Wars with, because, all of my brother, my brother's 17 years older than me. All of my cousins, they're even older than that. And so, all the people that I knew that were, related to me in my life that love Star Wars, they were all a lot older than me. So, it's really hard as a young child, obviously, to me, they were grown-ups. They were working. They weren't, really there to play with me. And, all of my friends, because I watched Star Wars at such a young age, they either hadn't seen Star Wars yet because their parents were like, oh, that's too violent. Or, they didn't really, I don't know if they really connected with it in the way that I did. And it was like, oh yeah, that's cool. That, yeah, the lightsaber battle, ooh, the spaceship. And I was like, yeah, but what about this, and this? What about Darth Vader? What about, the meaning behind this, and this? And, people just, they didn't see it the way that I did. And, a lot of people, they saw it as just a movie, whereas, I was like, this is important. This is, that was a life-changing experience for me. And, my sisters, they like to play with my action figures, and we would play action figures together. But a lot of my childhood I spent by myself. And, because I grew up on a ranch, I had plenty of space to go and play. And I would go and I would, like, build mud houses for my action figures. I would build them little villages all around, the ranch. My dad loved it. He thought it was so cool. And my sisters liked it too. They thought it was cool, but nobody kind of understood why. And I think that was something that it was always hard to find somebody that I could connect with that understood my love for this. And it's something I hadn't found until I started doing YouTube, and I met other people that felt the same way that I did about Star Wars. And so it's like, that's why I love doing this so much, because it's the first time in my life when I say this and it's very cheesy, but I found my people. I found the people that understand the thing that speaks to my soul. And, it's just being surrounded by people that are kindred spirits. And so, yeah, it was hard growing up because, I didn't have anyone to share that with. But that's, I learned, I obviously have other interests. And so, I had to, all the normie stuff, I could relate to other people. But Star Wars was always that special thing that, meant so much to me. And I cherished it. And, I hadn't found anyone that I could talk to at the level that I do now here on YouTube. But I hope that answered your question. Question number 4. If you could create a force power, what would it be? Now, this one, I found out that it actually is a real thing because I love animals, and I love the idea of talking to animals. And when I was a little kid, I loved movies like Dr. Dolittle, the original one, and then also the Eddie Murphy remakes. And that was just something that I love going to zoos. I grew up on a ranch. I was always surrounded by animals, and I always was like, what are you thinking? And you get to know, especially when you're growing up with these animals, you get to know their personalities, so you can anticipate their moods, and the things that they like, the things that they don't like, which cat or which dog is going to show up when I'm doing this activity. And so I felt like I knew them, but I wanted so much to talk to them. And so I always thought in Star Wars, I was like, it would be cool if, because, the Force is an energy that binds the galaxy together, if somehow, Jedi or Sith were able to use the Force to communicate with animals or, aliens and, all life. And I thought that would be interesting. And if I was a Jedi, if I was training in this universe, I know that, Yoda says patience and study. I would do everything in my power to, make myself learn that type of ability and to understand the Force in that way, to where I could communicate with any life being I came into contact with. And I found out in, the Hand of Thrawn duology that, there are these creatures, in this cave, on the planet where the Hand of Thrawn is, and Luke and Mara are on this adventure going through this cave. And, there's these, they're kind of like they're large. If you think of Avatar, those flying things that, are in that movie, the Avatar with the blue people, the James Cameron, that's what I kind of pictured them like, but a little bit more, obviously more intelligent, and opposable limbs, not as much. They don't have opposable thumbs, but kind of like that. And so Mara, these creatures captured her because they were protecting her, because the Chiss are on the planet, they're evil, and Mara isn't as in tune with the Force, so she doesn't know that they're trying to communicate with her. And then when Luke gets there, Luke's a full-on Jedi. When Luke gets there, he is able to go through the Force frequencies to communicate with these animals, and they go on an adventure with Child of Winds, and Child of Winds helps them. Child of Winds is one of these creatures, and Luke learns about them, and they have that they're able to communicate through the Force. And I was like, oh my gosh, this ability that I always thought was something that I'd want. And, it's an actual real thing. It's actually in the Star Wars lore. And I think maybe that I love the Hand of Thrawn duology. And that those are, out of all of the Star Wars books I've read, those two stories, I love the way that it, completely completes Luke's story arc and, answers the questions that, that they had been brought up in previous books, and I loved that concept. I loved that Force ability was invented. So that was the Force ability that I had always wanted, and that I had thought of as a child, and then I found out later that it was actually something that was created in the EU. So that's the Force ability that I would want. And as far as like other things, I haven't, there's a lot that I can go into, but that was always the top one. And learning that it exists was awesome. Question number 5. What are some of your favorite Star Wars memories, movies, viewings, collecting, etc.? So this is a story, because I have so many, but this is kind of a story that I haven't told too much. I did a video on it, but I think I'll just elaborate a little bit more. So, like I said earlier in this video, I have really bad social anxiety. I have a really hard time talking to people one-on-one, just because, I'm just so used to people judging me and for, being this weird Star Wars girl, and I always found it difficult. So I was always comfortable doing, public speaking and giving presentations, because, it depersonalizes it in a way. And, I'm not talking to just someone, I'm talking to many people. So, maybe if there's one negative person, there can be, 10 positive people. And so it made me, it was just something I've always been more comfortable doing. And so when I was in high school, I went to the same high school as George Lucas. And when I was graduating, it, was the anniversary of one of his high school graduations. And so I was in the hallway, I was putting stuff in my locker, and my best friend Sierra came up to me. She said, oh, and she's like, all right, well, I have to go because I have to go, type up my speech. I was like, oh, what are you giving the speech on? And she's like, oh, the auditions for, our graduation speeches are tomorrow. tomorrow. And I was like, oh, really? And she's like, yeah, anyone can go audition. She's like, I think there's only 3 people so far, like, including myself. And I was like, huh, you know, that sounds fun. That sounds interesting. I was like, huh, maybe I'll do that. And she's like, yeah, you totally should. And so I went home. It was actually on this computer that I use to edit all my videos now, and I just started. I thought of, you know, what I wanted to say, and I started typing, and 45 minutes later I had my speech. And my mom, I remember, she even came by because she was getting you know, food for the dogs, and she's like, what are you doing? I was like, oh, I'm gonna audition, you know, to give a speech at graduation tomorrow, so this is my speech. And she's just like, oh, cool. And you know, my mom, you know, she always wanted her little perfect blonde cheerleader that was good at dancing, good at sports, and, you know, she got me. And, well, she got the others with my other sisters. But when I came out, you know, I'm the oldest, I'm her first girl, she got the little hobbit that liked Star Wars, which was not at all what she was expecting, but, you know, that's what she got. And it's little things that, you know, hearing as an adult now, my mom always talks about it, and it's one of those things that, you know, me and my mom, we share this memory. I remember her asking, and she always goes and she'll tell people, oh yeah, my daughter gave a speech at her high school graduation. It was all about Star Wars and George Lucas. She wrote the speech in 45 minutes. I remember her doing it. And I was like, oh, that's cool. You know, my mom, you know, something that I'm proud of, my mom remembers, and she's proud of me for doing it, which, you know, growing up, that wasn't a very common thing. So that's something that's always been special to me, is that my mom shares that memory with me, and, you know, my mom was proud of me. And then I didn't tell anyone else in my family I was giving a speech. So at my graduation, when I went up and I gave the speech, and I talked all about George Lucas and Star Wars, and, you know, what it was like going to the same high school as him, my kind of high school experience, and then, you know, how Star Wars is, you know, such an impact on me and on the world, and, you know, how, you know, I aspire to, you know, even create, you know, I can't even hold a candle up to what George Lucas created, but, you know, it inspired me to, you know, make the best of my life that I possibly could, and, you know, Star Wars did that. And so being able to do that, that was one of the greatest moments of my life, and being there, you know, being able to look at all of, you know, my classmates, and, you know, it was just a perfect, like, moment of this is me expressing myself. And, you know, I just saw, you know, everyone smiling, because everyone knows me as that weird Star Wars girl. And at the end of my speech, I did make a Star Trek reference too. I said, you know, may the Force be with you, and don't forget to live long and prosper. And, you know, all of the parents, you know, all the grandparents, all the family that was in the audience, I saw so many people, you know, do the Vulcan salute and do it back to me. And there was this one, you know, man, I don't know if it was somebody's grandpa or somebody's father, and it was, you know, directly center, and I just remember he was the first one to put his hand up, and, you know, it made me feel so happy, because I'm like, oh my God, you know, I'm able to connect with not just, you know, one person, I just connected with so many people, and it was just one of the best experiences of my life, you know, just being able to completely let everything go, be myself, express myself, open my heart and soul up, and, you know, to get that kind of acceptance. And it was one of the best moments of my life. That video is here on YouTube. The quality isn't very good. It's one of my very early videos, but, you know, if you want to see, you know, people that want to call me out as being, you know, a fake Star Wars fan, you want to, I mean, I gave a speech about Star Wars at my graduation. That's never going to change. Anyone that knows me in my, you know, real life knows that I've always been a Star Wars fan since the moment I watched it. So if you want to go see that, you want to see that moment that I had, the video is there. And yeah, so that was one of, you know, the most special moments of my life, and, you know, nobody's ever going to be able to take that away from me. And that was before, you know, George Lucas sold to Disney. That was before, you know, we got the sequel trilogy, and it was just a time in my life where, you know, I had so much hope, and I was going to college. I was going to go to college to learn how to be a concept artist, and I was going to work at Lucasfilm, and I was going to work for George Lucas, and, you know, my life, you know, I had this plan, and it was one of the greatest moments, and that it's very special to me. So I hope that answers your question. Question number 6. Who is your favorite Clone Wars character / episode? This one, as far as character, if you're not going off, you know, traditional characters, because Darth Vader is my favorite character. You know, when he's Anakin, when he's Darth Vader, he's my favorite. That is always going to be my favorite character in Star Wars. But as far as, you know, characters that I would consider, you know, introduced in the Clone Wars, I know a lot of people are going to say Ahsoka, but it took me a little while to get used to Ahsoka. But, you know, my favorite I guess, character that you really kind of, touched me in, like, the soul and in the feels was Fives. He's my favorite clone, and, just following his story, even though, he's not, I would say he's one of the main characters, but I feel like, maybe he got, like, the first tier characters like Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, Padme, and then you have, like, the second tier. I think he would be considered more in, like, the second tier, but, I really liked Fives, and I loved watching his journey. I loved everything that he was able to accomplish, and then my favorite episode is, there's a couple episodes that cover what happens, but basically Fives finds out, kind of, it's one of those what ifs. Like, he finds out about the chip that's in all of the clones' heads that, when Palpatine says execute Order 66, it sets off, it's a way for, Palpatine so he can control all the clones. Fives finds out about it on accident because he's in Kamino, and they're trying to heal him after a mission, and Echo had died, and so he finds out about the chip, and him and this droid are working to uncover this conspiracy theory, and then he has to get to Coruscant because he needs to tell Anakin and he needs to tell Obi-Wan, and it's so tragic what happens, but he's right there, he's so close, and if he would have made it, everything that happened in Revenge of the Sith could have been avoided, but he didn't, and it's such a tragedy. But he tried everything he possibly could, and it breaks your heart. But that is my favorite character, and those are my favorite episodes because they're so well written. You're following this little journey, and it's like there's so much hope because everything that's weighing on him being able to accomplish his goal, and he doesn't. His life is cut short, and it's a beautiful tragedy, and it blew my mind. This is a cartoon. You want to say this is for kids? It's one of the best written episodes I've ever seen in a TV show, and it's from the Clone Wars. So whenever people say, oh well, I don't really want to watch it, I'm like, no, you have to. It's so worth it, because once you get to where the writing really takes off, it will blow your freaking mind. And he's my favorite character. This great character. It's great episodes. So I hope that answered your question. Question number 7. Are you in a relationship? So, I know this has nothing to do with Star Wars, but this is, whenever I do Q&As, always one of the top questions I get asked. So I felt like I needed to be included just so I can clear the air about this. I have answered this question many, many times, but I guess I need to reinstate it. Yes, I am in a relationship. I've been in a relationship for a very, very, very long time. Whenever you hear me refer to someone as Peaches on a live stream, that is my boyfriend. That's his nickname. That's what I call him because he's sweet and fuzzy, just like a peach. And he loves me. He loves me very, very much, just as, I love him. He's a great, wonderful person. He's also, an amazing father. If you hear me refer to my stepdaughter, that is his daughter. I've known her since she was 3 years old. She's 9 years old now. And, even though he and I are not married, the reason why I refer to her as my stepdaughter is because cutest things ever. I was taking her to go watch the World Cup because Portugal and Spain were playing against one another, and me and my boyfriend were both Portuguese, both from the same tiny town, where Portuguese, our grandmothers, went to church together. We didn't meet till later on in life, but that's beside the point. I'm taking my stepdaughter, his daughter, to go watch the World Cup at this pub, which it's not a bar, it's like a restaurant that's like pub thing, and that's where the World Cup was playing. So I was taking her, and when we were walking into, the pub, I'm holding her hand, and she, asked me, she's like, Anna, what's a stepmom? And I was like, Bella, you know what a stepmom is? And she's just like, well, are you my stepmom? And I was just like, do you want me to be? And she's just like, yeah. And I was like, okay, you can call me your stepmom. And so that's where that comes from. But yeah, he's my person. So yes, I am in a relationship, and that's not ever going to change. So I I hope that answers the question. I hope that clears it up. And, you know, I hope, you know, there's no animosity from people because of that. But this is my channel where I talk about Star Wars. I'm not sitting here, you know, talking about, you know, my personal life, you know, that aspect of my life. When I talk about, you know, things on my channel, it's about, you know, me and, you know, my feelings towards Star Wars and other movies and stuff. It's not me going, oh, you know, look at what I did on my anniversary type of thing. It's a very different type of channel than what I do. And I try to leave, you know, others in my personal life out of what I do here, just because, you know, they are all normies, and, you know, they don't really care too much about Star Wars and whatnot. Like my family, they don't. He's learning. He loves me and he accepts me, and, you know, even though he might think I'm a little bit crazy, I think, you know, he also thinks it's kind of cool. So it's great. So yes, I am in a relationship. I'm in a very happy, loving relationship. So just to clear the air, I hope that answers that question, and I hope that in the future, you know, maybe I don't get this question as often. But yeah, back on to Star Wars questions. Question number 8. Any items you've had to let go of because of lack of space where you lived? So I am actually kind of a hoarder, if you can't tell from my space behind me. I have a really hard time of letting things go and throwing things away and giving things up. When I was a kid, you know, I watched Toy Story. Toy Story was a huge part of my life. And, you know, I took that to heart in a way, is that, you know, I saw my toys and I'm like, oh my God, they're real things, you know, and I was, you know, I talked earlier about how, you know, I was kind of alone. I didn't have anyone to relate to. So when, you know, I was by myself and I was lonely, you know, my toys, my action figures, they, to me, were real. And, you know, even though they couldn't talk to me, you know, when I leave, you know, they come alive, and they care about me just the way that, you know, Woody cares about Andy. And so, and then, you know, also there's movies like, you know, The Brave Little Toaster, and how, you know, the human in that one, he doesn't throw anything away, because, again, they're alive, they care about him. And so seeing that at a very early age, you know, it made me kind of believe that. And I have a really hard time throwing things away now, because I'm like, no, like, I have this emotional connection with it. And so I guess the closest I could say is like, no, unless it's broken beyond repair, unless, you know, my mother threw it away, like, I have a really hard time getting rid of stuff. And so when I was in college, you know, I was in, you know, dorms and then apartments. I didn't have a lot of space, so, you know, there's plenty of storage at both of my parents' houses. So I would just either keep it at, you know, mom's house or dad's house. And so now as an adult, you know, I'm like surrounded by stuff, and, you know, even all the stuff you see behind me, there's more. I have boxes underneath this table that I have my computers on. There's boxes behind me. I also am going to be moving soon, so you know, it's just everywhere. I have stuff everywhere. I am, like, as far as when it comes to Star Wars stuff, I'm a little bit of a hoarder, but I think it's like a controlled chaos. So, and off my top of my head, maybe that's a bad thing, is that no, I cannot think of something that I've gotten rid of, because I just keep it all. And yeah, a little fun fact about me, guys. But hey, that's the point of this Q&A. So I hope that answered your question. I hope you enjoyed that little rambling that I just gave you. Question number 9. What is your favorite quote from a Star Wars/Star Trek movie? Alright, so if we're just talking about the movies as far as Star Trek goes, my favorite, one of, I think, the most powerful scenes that I've ever seen is in the Wrath of Khan, when this thing happens and, you know, Spock, you know, puts the needs of the many out, you know, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, and he has that beautiful moment with Captain Kirk, and it's such a Spock thing to do. But, you know, I would have to say, you know, the thing that touches me, and it you know, every time I, like, think about it, it makes me want to cry, but it's like when he says, you know, I haven't, you know, always shall be your friend. I'm like, all the feels. And so it's like, kind of like how in Star Wars, when, you know, that scene between Han and Leia, and, you know, Han, when she says, I love you, and Han says, I know. And, you know, that's such an iconic moment. It has so much meaning, so much depth. I feel like that line, you know, I have and always shall be your friend, I feel like that's, you know, the Star Trek equivalent to that line from Star Wars. Or, you know, that moment from Star Wars to, you know, just put everything into perspective. I don't know if everyone that, you know, watches my channel is a Star Trek fan. But, you know, that in a Star Trek movie, and then, you know, it gets me in the feels every single time. And, you know, when, you know, I've only had like one friend say that to me, and I was like, oh, my heart. I mean, it's like, gets me. And then, of course, you know, the scene where, you know, at Spock's funeral where Kirk says, you know, he was so human. It gets me in the feels. And as far as Star Wars go, my favorite quote from Star Wars, and it was in every single movie, and now it's not anymore, but this is where the fun begins. It's every time I hear it, I'm just like, yes! You know, this is where the fun begins, and it's just, it's such a great line. It makes me happy every single time I hear it, and, you know, this is where the fun begins. When I graduated from college, I was able to decorate my little cap, and I had, you know, an outline of, like, Darth Vader, and I made sure that his lightsaber lit up, and I put, you know, this is where the fun begins, you know. For people that, you know, aren't really good with change, I know I'm not, you know, I'm very set in my ways, and so when something changes, I either get, like, either emotional or, like, very elated. I go through, like, every emotion under the rainbow when I have to, you know, deal with, you know, a big change in my life. And so I always loved to just insert that quote in there, and I'm like, this is where the fun begins, you know. It's just another adventure, and, you know, it makes me happy every single time I hear that line. It's my favorite quote from Star Wars. This is where the fun begins. So, yeah! Thanks for asking. That's a fun question. Question number 10. What is your absolute most treasured Star Wars item you own? Not the most valuable. Well, I have so much that, like, I have such a strong connection with, you know, everything that I have that's from Star Wars. Like, everything I have behind me, you know, if I bought it, I can tell you where I bought it, I can tell you how much I paid for it, and I can tell you, you know, roughly around what age I was when I got it. And then a lot of things that are behind me were gifts from people, and I can tell you, you know, who, like, gave me what. And, you know, like I said, I have, you know, this emotional connection with all of this, because to me it's real, and they have feelings too. But when I was a kid, you know, all of my Star Wars stuff, like you can see the Millennium Falcon behind me, you know, that was a hand-me-down from my brother. The Jabba the Hutt, that's a hand-me-down from my brother. A lot of the things that I started off with were just things that were my brother's toys, which then became my toys. And so for a while I didn't have anything that was, you know, new, that was mine. And so when I got my first Star Wars action figure, it was this one. It was this Princess Leia, and me and my mother, we were at an antique store in Sacramento, and I was walking past booth after booth, and I saw this in a little glass case, and, you know, it's the original old Kenner Princess Leia. You know, it's like the little legs, and it's just been so played with that, you know, look at how loose her legs are. I colored the bottom of her feet. They've changed colors. The paint on her face is kind of coming off. But I just remember it was sitting in this glass case, and I was like, I didn't have any girl action figures because, you know, my mom had said, you know, the boys, like my brother, like my cousins, they lost it, or the dogs had chewed it up. You know, they just didn't care too much about, you know, the girl action figure. And so I didn't have any girl action figures, and I wanted Princess Leia. And so I saw this in a case, and it was $18. My mom is the biggest cheat state on the face of the planet. And I told my mom, I was like, Mom, you know, can I get this action figure? And she said no, because it was $18. And I said, but Mommy, like, my birthday's in like 3 months. Can I get it? And she's just like, no, Anna, you can't get it. I was like, but what if it's my birthday present and my Christmas present? And, you know, I was able to talk her into it. And so this was my birthday and Christmas present one year. So I didn't get any other birthday presents. I didn't get any other Christmas presents. This was it, this $18, you know, little Kenner Princess Leia. And it was the first Star Wars action figure that it was the first one that was mine. It wasn't my brother's before. It wasn't a hand-me-down. It was mine. And it was Princess Leia. And, you know, I took her with me to school. She fit, I mean, I obviously, I might be a hobbit, but I have giant hands for being a hobbit. But, you know, I would keep her in my backpack with me. I would keep her in my pocket. I took her with me, and, you know, I would hold on to her because, you know, I related to Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker, he was just a boy on a farm that wanted to become a Jedi and make something of himself and change the world. And, you know, I related to him so much that, you know, I was just a little girl that grew up on a farm, and I wanted to make something of myself. But then when I saw Princess Leia was, you know, the complete embodiment of, I guess in a way, like what, you know, I should aspire to be. You know, she was already confident. She was beautiful. She could stand up to the, you know, Darth Vader, the Empire, Grand Moff Tarkin. She could stand there and watch her planet get destroyed and, you know, not break and not give up hope. She was such a strong person, and, you know, having her with me when I was little, you know, especially when this was times when I was getting bullied, when, you know, my life wasn't, you know, probably like the worst years of my life. And so keeping Princess Leia with me and having her with me, you know, either in my backpack or my pocket or in my hand, you know, and I wouldn't want to show people this because I would get made fun of. I remember somebody went and got a pencil out of my backpack and they found it and, you know, made fun of me in front of the class because I had Princess Leia. And, you know, I would, you know, keep her in my jacket pocket so I could hold on to her, and it gave me strength to have her with me. And, you know, even I remember, you know, her head, somebody pulled off her head in class, and so her head is actually super glued on, so I can't turn it or anything. And, you know, there's, you can kind of see like the residue of super glue. I had to color her hair in with Sharpie because the kid scraped it against the floor. And, you know, she's just been through a lot. And some of the worst moments of my childhood, I had her with me. And, you know, she gave me strength and she gave me hope. And, you know, this is a very special action figure to me. And so it's not the most valuable. It's not the most expensive. It's not, you know, in pristine condition. It's very much, it has a lot of love on this action figure. But it is, you know, she's been there with me. And she's very, very special to me. And, you know, I took her with me to college. I've taken, you know, some kids have a blankie. I have my Princess Leia action figure. So this might not look like that much to someone. It might just look as, you know, a really used action figure. But to me, this is, you know, the most valuable, the most priceless thing that I own. And yeah. So, I know that was a lot, but I hope you guys enjoyed this Q&A video. I think I might do a new tradition, you know, the beginning of every month, do a Q&A. If you want your questions to be included in the Q&A, go follow me on Instagram, so that way when I, you know, make an announcement I'm going to do a Q&A, you guys can put your questions in. There was so many great questions this time, so it was hard to narrow it down to just 10, but, you know, thank you for asking them. I'm more than happy to answer. And yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, that's okay too. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Make sure you click that little bell. That way you get a notification when I do other videos and live streams. And make sure you leave me a comment. Do let me know what you thought of this video. If, you know, there was something you wanted me to elaborate more on based on these questions that I answered, I am more than happy to. And yeah, so until next time, everyone, have a great rest of your day, and may the Force be with you, because we are really, really, really going to need it. Bye, everyone. What's up, everyone? It's Anna, also known as That Star Wars Girl, and I have an Etsy store, so if you've ever wanted to own a print of my artwork, this is the place to go. As you can see, I have a lot of recognizable characters, from horror films to heroes to Star Wars characters. Some of the notable characters I have on here are Darth Vader, which I did a couple live streams painting, so you can own a print of this painting. I also have Luke Skywalker, the Binary Sunset version, one of my favorite scenes in the original New Hope movie. I have Darth Maul, which Ray Parks himself actually complimented me on Instagram. And then last but certainly not least, Ahsoka Tano. So if you want to own any of these prints, go right on over to my Etsy store. Again, that's The Art of Anna, That Star Wars Girl, or TSWG for short. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. What's up, everyone? I have a P.O. box, so if you want to send me some mail, go ahead and send it to Anna, That Star Wars Girl, or TSWG for short, at P.O. Box number 28171, Santa Ana, California, 927998171. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.